So our first speaker is going to be Jared Carver from American Distillation Equipment. He'll be speaking about the basics of processing and providing a few tips on things to think about. Jared has 20 plus years of industrial experience, 10 plus in extraction, distillation, and purification of natural oils at bench, pilot, and production scale. He is the president of American Distillation Equipment in Springfield, Mass. Jared, if you want to share your screen and take it away. You have to get off mute.
There we go. All right. Thanks so much for your introduction, John. Jared Carver, again, from American Distillation Equipment, and I'm going to cover the basics of hemp processing. This will take about 20 minutes, and we're not going to dive into any specific topic very deeply. Just to expand a little bit on what John had mentioned, I've spent the first years of my career in the aerospace industry for about 10 years. Spent the last 10 in pharmaceutical and natural product production. And I've worked for a variety of companies on a variety of different topics and production. Since about 2014, I've worked in the cannabis and hemp industry, consulting for them on a variety of scales. So I'm well apprised with all steps of manufacturing from harvest through finished product, finished good. In this presentation, we're not going to talk about farming or plant genetics. There are a lot of other opportunities and people that are more expert in those areas than I am. We're also going to omit anything about permitting. So the permits that you would need for cultivation or processing hemp, or permits that you might need with a local fire marshal. Those things are all important to consider, and remember that those are going to be necessary, but we're not going to delve into those in any detail. And the last one is any federal, state, or town regulatory compliance. Every town, every state, and the federal government all have regulations around hemp and hemp processing. You need to follow all of those guidelines to be compliant. What we will cover in this presentation is biomass to finished good, common processing methods, pros and cons of those methods, and approximate yields from processing steps. And I'm going to move kind of quickly through this. So again, we're not going to dive too deeply. I want to make sure to leave time at the end of this presentation for Q&A. Also, my contact information is on the last slide. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask independent of this, feel free to reach out through email. So in 2018, the U.S. Agriculture Department passed the Farm Bill, and that included the industrial cultivation of hemp. And they legally separated that from cannabis. So hemp is grown for its primary active ingredients, cannabidiols, specifically CBD and CBG. The other active ingredient in hemp is THC, and that's more prevalent in marijuana. The federal limits of hemp have 0.3% THC in the plant, in the biomass. State programs may have a higher limit. That depends on the individual states. Be sure that you're compliant with each of your states when you're growing. There are other compounds inside the hemp plant as well: terpenes, fats, waxes, and sterols. Terpenes are typically desirable. Fats, waxes, and sterols are not desirable. On the next slide, we have the hemp process overview. Each of these rectangular blocks, biomass, crude oil, distillate, and all the way on the far right, edibles, topicals, vapes, CBD isolate, and zero THC CBD, are endpoints or sale points. The arrows, the first two are extraction, the middle one is distillation, and the third set of arrows are another series of value-added steps that you can use to increase the profitability of any hemp product. So we're going to go through each of these step by step, again, at a fairly high level, moving rather quickly. We're going to start with production of biomass. So crops out in the field are just that. They're a crop. When you want to convert it into a biomass, you need to harvest that crop. Typically for 50 acres and less, people do that by hand. For larger operations, they'll get cultivation equipment where they'll have machinery cut down and buck the hemp plants. The first step after harvest is drying, and that's to prevent mold buildup on the plant material. On the right-hand side, you see hang drying, which is a common, low-cost, very effective method for drying large volumes of hemp. On the left side, you see a drying oven. This particular one is featured with racks, and we'll talk about the advantage of racks in a moment. So the first step after harvest is always drying, and that converts a crop into biomass. After drying, you need to mill the biomass so it's a uniform size to make it more suitable for extraction. In the top left-hand corner, you see the dried biomass before and after milling. The center photo, that green tube, is a string line trimmer with a lot of string lines in it. You feed material in the top and it dumps out the bottom, and it'll break up the dried biomass into a finely divided powder. If you want a very consistent or very fine powder, you might want to look into something like a hammer mill down on the left-hand side, which will continuously produce a very consistent material and can handle very large throughputs. After we've harvested our crop and converted it into biomass, we'll want to go through some sort of an extraction step. There are two common methods of extraction, ethanol and CO2. There are some less common methods as well, and the marijuana industry will use some different methods than are suitable for hemp. Today, we're just going to take a look at ethanol and CO2 extraction. In that first method, ethanol extraction, it's a low capital requirement. It has a higher operating cost, but it's very easy to increase throughput for scale up. The method of extraction and the quality of the extraction is temperature dependent. So the hotter that you run the biomass extraction, the more material you're going to end up extracting, which will cause problems downstream. If you want a very clean ethanol extraction, the best method is to chill it down to minus 80 degrees centigrade. You introduce biomass either by itself or in screened bags, and you let it steep, you let it soak in there. The CBD and other compounds will leach out into the ethanol. Then you filter press off or you screen off the biomass, retaining the CBD-rich ethanol. The other method for extraction is supercritical CO2. Supercritical CO2 is primarily suited for smaller batches. It is a higher capital investment, but does have a significantly lower operating cost. You can extract at different temperatures and pressures to really make fine cuts of the different materials. We had talked about terpenes, CBD, fats, waxes, and sterols. If you over extract either with ethanol or CO2, meaning you extract at the wrong temperature or the wrong temperature and pressure, you'll need to winterize that material, and that's removing fats, waxes, and sterols. For effective winterization, you're going to take your crude extracted oil, dilute it with ethanol, chill that diluted CBD ethanol mixture to minus 80 degrees centigrade. Then you're either going to use a gravity filter, a vacuum filter, or a filter press featured down in the lower right-hand corner to remove those fats, waxes, and sterols. A photograph of those fats, waxes, and sterols is up in the upper right-hand corner. They're not typically desired for end-use products for CBD. After winterization, you would need to remove the ethanol that you put into the crude oil. And there are two methods. One is a batch process, one is a continuous process. On the left-hand side, you'll see a rotary evaporator. That is a batch process. On the right-hand side, you'll see a falling film evaporator. For the left-hand side, the standard size rotary evaporator for the hemp industry is 50 liter. You'll charge material into the glass ball on the right-hand side. You'll draw a vacuum on the entire system, and the ethanol will evaporate and get condensed on the coils on the left-hand side of the rotary evaporator, leaving behind your crude extracted oil. On the right-hand side, for a falling film, it's a continuous process. That CBD ethanol mixture is fed into the falling film evaporator, which is also under vacuum, and the ethanol and crude CBD extract are separated from each other into two different streams. This photo is crude oil. One of these photos has been manufactured with supercritical CO2 extraction. The other has been manufactured with ethanol extraction. The end product is nearly identical. So there's not a tremendous amount of difference if you're just going for crude extracted oil. So up to this point, we've covered production of biomass, extraction, and manufacturing of crude oil. We're going to concentrate that crude oil through a distillation step to produce distillate. There are two pieces of equipment. Again, one is a batch production and the other is continuous processing. In front of you, you see a vacuum short path fractional still. All natural compounds need to be distilled under vacuum. Vacuum reduces the boiling point and protects product integrity. High heat will often decompose natural products into undesirable or unusable compounds. So in a short path vacuum fractional still, these are small batches. They typically have a low throughput. They're a low cost, good entry level option. They're very simple to operate, but it does require an operator to be dedicated to the machine throughout the entire process run to pull off desired and undesired fractions. The next option for distillation are wiped film apparatus. Again, they're short path and they're continuous operation, meaning that you feed in crude oil and continually remove distillate from the system. They're either for small or large scale. They do come at a higher capital cost, but they make a very consistent finished product. Distillate is typically one of the most marketable first points of sale in the hemp process. On the left-hand side, you see a jar of distillate. On the center picture, you see some of that distillate being poured out. It's fairly thick and viscous. The concentration is often between 70 and 90% CBD, depending on the quality of biomass, the method of extraction, and how well the material was distilled. The higher the concentration, the more likely it is that that material will crash out into a crystalline form on its own. You can get it to go back into solution by warming that material back up. Distillate can be converted into edibles, topicals, vape cartridges. It can be refined into an isolate, or it can also be remediated from THC. So if we take a look at, again, our hemp overview process, we're all the way over into the third block on distillate. We'll talk about some value-added manufacturing, isolation, and chromatography steps to realize more value out of individual products. If you want to make vapes, topicals, or edibles, you're going to need a commercial kitchen. You don't need anything this particularly elaborate, but you will need stainless steel surfaces, and you will have to follow guidelines for dietary supplements, food ingredients, or cosmetic ingredients. And those regulations can easily be found on other resources. Just be aware that you can't manufacture things and put them into the market without regulatory guidance and compliance. Topicals are very easy to manufacture. We're not going to talk about any specific product formulation. Generally for topicals, you would take distillate and combine it with a carrier oil, homogenize it, and then finish package it. If anybody has any questions about manufacturing of topicals, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my contact information is on the last page. Pressing on, some common edibles are gummies. CBD gummies are a very wide growing market sector. On the left-hand side, you'll see some sugar-coated gummies. On the right-hand side, you'll see a gummy depositor. For manufacturing of gummies, you take distillate, combine it with natural flavorings and colorings, warm it up. It feeds into the top of a hopper. The purple segment on the bottom are the molds for the gummies. The depositor will dose out an appropriate volume for each of those molds. After all of the molds are filled, you'll remove this tray, put it into a refrigerator or a freezer to chill it, and then you would put in a fresh tray and continue your manufacturing process. The last one are vape cartridges or vape carts. Equipment's available in the marketplace currently for vape carts, both small and large volume manufacturing. If you want to do a few hundred carts a day or a few hundred carts an hour, all that equipment is currently available. For vape cartridge manufacturing, you would take distillate and your hemp-derived terpenes, blend them together for a specific flavor profile, and potentially add another additive in to keep the material from crashing out or solidifying inside a vape cart. The vape cartridge market is highly regulated. Make sure you follow all of your compliance guidelines with your state program for manufacture and labeling of vape cartridges and any additives that you put into vape cartridges. Pressing on to CBD isolate manufacture. If you want to make a pharmaceutical ingredient, meaning 99% pure, you can manufacture CBD isolate. You take an item like on the right-hand side that is a reactor. You would put distillate into it, add an organic solvent, warm it up, dissolve everything, then slowly cool it off to form crystals. You would then take those freshly formed crystals, rinse them again with several volumes of organic solvent, and you would be left over with a light, fluffy powder. You would then have to purge it in a vacuum oven to produce pharmaceutical grade CBD isolate. The last step is chromatography, and this is where you can remediate THC. Depending on the state program, Some states will allow you to pull crops out of the ground that have a higher THC limit than the threshold as long as you remediate it. You cannot remediate THC in the plant itself. It has to go through several processing steps afterwards. For chromatography, it's high operating costs and typically a low throughput volume. It's pretty easy to scale or to replicate, but does generate a good amount of waste solvent. For chromatography, you'll take an organic solvent and your distillate, mix them together, introduce them to the top of a silica column, then flush another organic solvent over the column. The THC would stay trapped on the silica and the CBD would come out the bottom of the column. Up top, you'll see a gravity control column. And then down low at the bottom, you'll see a continuous operation apparatus. Most people ask me, what can I expect for a yield on CBD if I grow an acre of it or X number of acres? This is the numbers per acre. So in the top table, assumptions for grow, we start with pounds. Generally speaking, you can expect about 1,500 pounds of hemp per acre. When it's dried, that turns into about 1,200 pounds. The concentration of that biomass varies greatly depending on the soil, water, and sunlight that year. Generally speaking, 10% is a good number to carry around. I have seen it as low as 6%, and I've seen it higher in 12 or 14%. In the New England market, it's usually 8 to 10% CBD by concentration. If you were to take a look at that, that 10% by concentration means of your 1,200 pounds, you have 120 pounds of CBD that you can utilize from that material. When it's harvested, everybody talks about it in pounds, then it shifts over into kilograms when you start processing. In the lower table for processing, we've got each of the major processing steps, the inputs and outputs, and the expected process recovery. So harvesting, the input is the crop, the output is the biomass. Drying and grinding, your input is biomass, your output is ground biomass. Extraction, winterization, your input is ground biomass, your output is crude oil. Distillation, the input is crude oil, the output is distillate. Isolation or chromatography, your input is distillate and the output is isolate or remediated material. Each of those process steps comes at a cost. You end up losing material. So if we convert 1 acre at 10%, at harvest, we're about 682 kilos. And then it turns into about 545 kilos after drying and grinding. Then you further lose a small amount of material as you go through the extraction and winterization steps, distillation, isolation, or chromatography. The numbers in the following column are price per kilo. So it's what you can expect to sell a kilo of material at each of those processing steps. These are general numbers as of this point in time for New England. These numbers do fluctuate with seasonality and how much biomass is available and how well the material is processed. Pressing on just a little bit, equipment and capital investment costs. So we've got two scenarios here. On the left-hand side, it's a 50-acre farm. On the right-hand side, it's a 250 to 500 acre farm. 250 or 500 acres is a significant parcel in New England. It might also be suitable for a co-op. On the left-hand side, you can see that the lion's share of your equipment for this smaller processing is invested in extraction and distillation equipment, about $120,000 for extraction, distillation, winterization, and ethanol recovery equipment. Topicals, gummies, and vape carts, they're a la carte. You can add those as need be, but that ends up being another $30,000. Over on the right-hand side for the larger systems and scenarios, again, the bulk of your infrastructure cost is on the extraction and distillation, about $950,000. And then if you want to add topicals, gummies, and vape carts, you're again looking at another $80,000 in additive costs. This does not reflect the cost of a commercial kitchen, the cost of crops or acquiring biomass, does not include the cost of labor. This is just hard capital investment costs for equipment. If anybody's interested in estimated labor costs or the number of employees it would take to operate at either of these scales, again, my contact information will be all the way on the last slide. The other opportunity for generating extra revenue is toll processing. So if you have all of this equipment and you've made this capital outlay, you want to get the fastest return on investment you can. Toll processing is an excellent way to do that. Most toll processors take in biomass or harvested crops from other farms, and they'll end up processing it either on split work or a fee for hire, which is where the toll term comes from. And it ends up being contract manufacture. Those of you that are not familiar with split work is when a farmer agrees to give you part of his crop in exchange for toll processing. So this is an easy way to generate extra revenue if you've made the capital investment. So reviewing everything that we covered in brevity, again, none of this was in too terrific depth. It's just to get you from harvested crop all the way through to finished product. The major outlet points are biomass, crude oil, distillate, value-added manufacturing with edibles, topicals, or vapes, CBD isolate, and remediated THC. To get all the way to those end products, you'll have to go through an extraction step, a distillation step, and then again, some sort of a value-added manufacturing step. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. This is my email address, and it's the best method to get back in touch with you. Please don't be disappointed if I don't get back to you right away. It takes me a little bit of time to chug through emails.
Jared, thank you very much. That was a lot of information very quickly. I'm sure people will be having a lot of questions. I sure have a bunch. One of the things that you had talked about a lot was sort of the concentration or the amount that's going through this entire process. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the process and how it relates to quality. What happens to quality? Like, I know you bring something in off the field, if it's mishandled or if there's too much overhandling of it, you could degrade some of your final product. And then does that also happen along those individual steps you had talked about?
Sure. The biggest area for degradation, usually in relation to CBD, is with mishandling through heat. So if you extract at a very high temperature or very high pressure, you'll end up over extracting, or that added heat and pressure will cause the CBD molecule to fall apart and degrade. Once it falls apart and degrades, you can't put it back together. It's a one-way process. Similarly with distillation, if you try and utilize distillation without vacuum, the boiling point of the undesired compounds is so high that you'll end up cooking the CBD and again causing it to fall apart and break. Out in the field from harvest, the biggest problem is literally the crop rots, where it will mold over, it'll end up getting white mold, and you can still extract that material, but you'll have to go through other steps to make sure you don't have any biological contaminants that make it all the way through to your finished good or your finished product.
All right, thanks. I really appreciate that. One of the things that people always talked about sort of was like mold was a big issue up here, especially when you get something out in the field coming in. A lot of the time, the mold eventually goes away through processing, but some people always had questioned, when do we actually treat it for either mold, or I guess the term is, when do you decarboxylate some of this stuff in order to get a pure product? And is that something that's kind of figured in here?
Sure. Decarboxylation is a step of removing an extra CO molecule from the CBD itself. In the plant form, CBDA is the naturally occurring form. Decarboxylation means removing that acid form and converting CBDA into CBD. Through the process of increased heat, moderate heat, not excessive heat, you'll break off that extra CO molecule. You can either do that in your drying oven, or you can do that just prior to your distillation step. You can decarboxylate and convert CBDA into CBD. The advantage of CBDA is it's much easier to extract from the biomass than CBD is. So it depends on your individual processing methodology, whether you're targeting extracting CBDA and you want to leave the biomass undecarbed, or if you want to target removing CBD, in which case you would decarb the biomass itself.
Got it. All right. Hopefully people find some of this stuff pretty interesting. I surely do. You had talked about fats, waxes, and sterols being sort of an issue. I'm sure it's common knowledge out there of why these are problems, but maybe you can go over what the issues are with each one of those compounds or components and why it's really important to extract them.
Sure. It's important to segregate those for two reasons. The first is it limits your overall end product distillation potency. So when you distill, a lot of those compounds can, but not necessarily will, co-distill, meaning they'll end up in your distillate, reducing your overall product concentration, your overall product purity. So instead of being in the mid 80s or the high 80s, you may end up being lower in the 70s or even the 60% range if you don't do a good winterization step after over extraction. Distillation ends up being like a magnifying glass, and it magnifies whatever was extracted. The downside, aside from potency, the second part of that is the product ends up being very cloudy when you have a lot of fats and waxes left over in it. So you don't have a good pure oil, and it doesn't look good, and it doesn't formulate well for topicals or vape cartridges. They end up being very hazy, and that's not usually what the voice of customer wants to see.
Right. So you're saying it's not necessarily bad for you, but you're reducing the marketability of the product by having these products actually combined with your final product.
That's correct. There's nothing deleterious of these to your health. It's just overall marketability, as you had said.
Okay. No, that sounds great. Another question that people might have is, you've got all these different processes you talked about and different paths to get there. What are some of the factors that people think about? And maybe you can give us a sort of a how you guys have been sort of guiding and coaching people. Like sometimes you come in and say, okay, tell us what you want, and we'll kind of design something for you. But what are those questions that you ask of, what are you looking for?
Sure. Typically, the two questions I ask somebody who's new into the marketplace is, what is your end product and what is your scale of operation? And then we typically work backwards from there. So if somebody wants to grow 2 or 3 acres of hemp, I don't recommend that they would purchase processing equipment. I would recommend they find a contractor or a toll manufacturer. If somebody wants to grow, 50 acres of hemp, that's a good ballpark range to start looking at investing in equipment and doing more value-added processing in-house. And then the second one is, what sort of end products are you looking to make? Are they direct to market, direct to consumer, business to business? So all of those really help dictate how much capital investment and how much time you should spend investing in various pieces of equipment and in the hemp field.
And so some of the processes you had mentioned was, I know the big one people always talk about is the difference between ethanol and CO2 processing. I guess my question is, how do you feel about that? And I know there are different parameters associated with it, but also how many of each sort of, percentage wise do you think you have actually put in the field?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I think of supercritical CO2 as a good way to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, just like a craft brewer, as opposed to a large scale brewer. So ethanol extraction is definitely for large scale operations. So if you want to do 5,000 pounds of biomass a day or more, ethanol is going to be your route for extraction. If you're looking at doing 50 pounds of biomass a day, supercritical CO2, if you can afford the equipment, is a good alternative to that. Mostly what I see out in the field that pairs up well with our distillation equipment is ethanol extraction, though we have paired with supercritical CO2 extractors as well. The limiting factor for supercritical CO2 is the size pressure vessel that can be manufactured. All those have to be code stamped to handle a certain amount of pressure. So there's a limited size of how big a vessel, how thick the wall can be, and how densely you can pack the biomass into that vessel. As opposed to, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to do another question. So you said you want to finish up?
Ethanol, the only regulatory requirement that you have to be aware of is generally the fire marshal and how much ethanol you can store or have on hand. So you can get unpressurized vessels in very large sizes, very large scales. So that's typically why larger processors will tend towards ethanol extraction.
Got it. And there are a lot of ancillary types of equipment that are necessary. It looked like a lot of the equipment that you sort of were showing were sort of like complete packages. And then the packages are sort of hooked together sort of in series, one after the other to generate a final product. Is there a lot of other products or a lot of other things that you need that you should be thinking about along with these kind of units in order to produce the products at the end?
There is some ancillary equipment that wasn't shown. For instance, it's typically a good idea to have a few large freezers on hand, but those are low cost items. Also, other things just like basic toolkits and other things to work on equipment. It is processing equipment. No matter how robust it is manufactured, it does break, or people mishandle it or abuse it unintentionally, and you need to be able to repair those things. So there's some extra costs with capital spares for seals, gaskets, pumps, O-rings. Constantly seems like it's a struggle to have enough electrical supply power as you expand your business. You need to think about how much electricity you have available and what kind of equipment you may want in the future. So those are some other costs to just give consideration to for effectively running a manufacturing facility.
That's great. I know that you've had experience kind of in more areas than just Connecticut. Um, in terms of regulations, do you see obviously a lot of things that you do have regulations associated with the product does. Do you see a lot of regulations in terms of just owning and having it, the product, the equipment there? There's certain things you need to make sure of. You're dealing with ethanol, so do you have to have certain types of, you know, things farther away from each other, no sparks, things of that nature that somebody who might be starting out saying, I've got a building, can I just stick some equipment in this building?
Sure. There are a lot of regulatory requirements and compliances. Typically, you want to look for equipment that is C1D1 or C1D2, and that refers to how much solvent exposure the equipment can be around. Or you're going to have to build a small compliance room to do those solvent extractions or to handle large volumes of solvent. And all of that is usually regulated by a local fire marshal, where they'll come in, they'll look at the state regulations and the town regulations, and they'll advise you on how much solvent you can have, how large it can be, the number of egresses you have, the type of grounding, bonding, or shielding you need for electrical equipment, and any other finer minutia. And again, we didn't dive too much into it, but that's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like people go and say, well, I just buy a machine and that's my only cost. I've been in the facilities business for a while, and the cost of whatever you're doing is usually like 1/3. Then you have another third associated with everything you have to do prior, and then you got another third associated with all the soft costs associated with things you kind of didn't really know you had to do, but have to do just to have the machine available for you to use it. And like you said, there's a lot of things like, how thick the walls are. Is it bomb proof? Is it, are there certain things that you have to kind of abide by that have nothing really to do with the machine or a machine equipment seller, but you have to somehow figure out. Now, do you guys actually help with the entire setup of the lab itself, kind of from start to finish, or you do more in just the equipment side?
We can help with set up an entire lab. We can spec out and help design not just equipment, but not just the equipment that we manufacture, but we have some strategic partnered vendors that we've worked with on numerous projects, and we like their equipment, and it dovetails well upstream and downstream of our equipment. And if anybody needs assistance in that area, feel free to reach out to me at the email address on the screen.
That's awesome. There's one other question I just kind of want to ask, and this has more to do with the future. And what is the future holds for sort of this segment, the equipment you guys are doing, what new technologies you kind of see coming out? If I went to buy a piece of equipment today, would I be better off waiting a year because of better things coming out next year? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then the last thing, it has to do with the future, is I actually saw something this morning that people are using fermentation to actually create cannabidiols. Have you heard anything about that? So it's kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, I'll take it in two parts. I'll answer the easier one first. No, I haven't heard anything about fermentation to convert or make cannabidiols. I wouldn't be surprised, but if that's something you just heard about, I would expect that to be in its infancy. and it's going to take a long time before that comes up and becomes effective. Where I've seen the market heading more recently is utilizing the equipment that's currently in place. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of new types of equipment coming online. It seems that more pharmaceutical equipment is being brought into the industry itself, and that pharmaceutical grade equipment is used to further refine CBD or some of its minor cannabinoids, and to extract things like CBG, CBC, CBN, a few of those other minor cannabinoids. And each of those have different bioavailability. I'm not a biochemist, so again, I'll gloss over this lightly. Generally speaking, CBD is a very good analgesic, just good for pain. CBG has similar effects. It's a good analgesic. Items like CBN are good for anxiety or somebody just to kind of take the edge off. None of the cannabidiols from CBD or hemp plants are meant to get you stoned or high. They're all meant to just kind of help take the edge off of the day, or help take the edge off of that's it.
That's okay. I think people, hopefully, we've had a couple of these seminars, people talking about this. Hopefully they realize that there are over 100 cannabidiols in the hemp plant. And these are just a few that they've identified as being very useful in health, in medicines, and in kind of overall wellness. People are still doing lots and lots of studies on the effects and how it affects us. I mean, I think the whole concept of the cannabidiol system or cannabinoid system in our bodies was only realized 30 years ago or so. And a lot of people have just, the whole thing's pretty much in its infancy. Anyway, I do want to thank Jared. Thank you very much for being with us and kind of giving us that Processing 101's kind of primer and what it takes in order to kind of have equipment and what equipment's available out there and sort of what the process is. We're going to move on to Rick Sutil. Hey, Rick, how you doing?
Not bad, yourself and everybody here.
He's the CEO of Lhasa Extract in South Windsor. He'll be giving us his perspective on local processor in the state of Connecticut, kind of
Suffield.
going in Suffield, kind of going through his entire kind of process of where he actually, his history and kind of how he got to where he is today and what he's doing today. It was established he's a former highlight player, arborist, and woodworking aficionado, and it's himself and his wife, Valentina. They're located in a repurposed tobacco factory. It's one of only a small number of hemp oil manufacturers currently operating in Connecticut. Welcome, Rick. How you doing? I see you got your hairnet on, so you must be in the lab.
No, I'm outside the lab for now. I'll take a little tour and I'll show you what they're doing. Today's bottling day. So we're bottling our 3,000 full spectrum oils today. We're doing about 1,800 bottles.
That's great. Can you give us a little kind of history of how you got to where you are and what it's like to actually become a processor, and why you wanted to do this in the state of Connecticut?
Well, many years ago, I was a highlight player, and somebody told me, and I always used to make tables, and they said, "Hey, Ricky, there's some guy in Bloomfield that wants to take on a walnut tree, take it down and it's yours." I said, "Wow, walnut, I'll do it." So I went there with an electric chainsaw and my axe. How I didn't kill myself, I don't know. But then she shows me after I took it down, a $2,500 estimate for taking down the tree. So welcome to my tree service. And then from that point on, I bought this old abandoned tobacco factory about 18 years ago. It was condemned basically. And I refurbished it. And then there was some gentleman that came a few years back that they were thinking about renting out my space to dry all their biomass, since we have 37,000 square feet. So then we started to investigate it a little bit more, and I got more and more interested, and I started to do my due diligence. And I'm kind of a naturalist, and I like everything as natural as possible. In other words, I don't eat my oats from what I can get at Stop and Shop. I actually get the full oats, 100% organic. And so I looked at this industry, and I said, how can we stand out above the other 3,000 companies that are out there? And well, it has been 7 months of testing without making a dime. And now we know that we can stand out. What the gentleman was talking about, Jared, is so true, how you have to go to distillation and then your rotary evaporators. Well, we found a way to do away with all of that. So what we do is we take the fats and the waxes out prior to them going into the machine. And we take it right from there to the full spectrum oil. And as I'm concerned, I don't think there's any other company out there doing that. So what we're saying is when it comes to taste, we're second to none. And when it comes to our results and our testing, we're through the roof because we put no synthetics into it. We don't have to deep freeze it into ethanol for 80 degrees and then take out all the ethanol little by little. Because when you do that, you also take out some cannabinoids and everything else. Well, we don't. We go right from the machine, right to full spectrum because we figured out something that we can do prior to putting it into the machine, prior to the carboxylation, and how we run the machine is the best way of doing it and the most natural. So the only thing we have in ours is pressure, CO2, and C8 organic MCT oil. That's all we have. And you can't get it any more natural than that. And I think there are some pictures there, and I have some bottles here that are actual 3,000 milligram bottle. You can actually see crystallized. That's how pure it is. So we're very proud of that. And as far as it comes to edibles, because of the taste, I think we're number one. And now we're having people come to us and start to buy it because they like to infuse our oils into the edibles, like cookies and gummies and everything else.
So it sounded like you've started at, and I know a little bit of history about you. I know one year you're thinking about growing, and maybe you did a little growing in there, but it sounds like you're now more moving towards the distillation and the actual manufacturing of products. So maybe you can tell us a little about how to go when you were growing.
Horrible. I found out very quick that I'm not a grower. So I much rather pay the growers to grow our plants, and that's what I do. I subsidize some of the growers in the area, and they make a good quality plant, and it's a lot better for me. We get a lot better because they know what they do. They're growers. I'm not a grower. And so I don't grow anymore, but I do help the local farmers here in Simsbury and South Windsor to grow our products. And we actually, we have quite a bit of it, and we're doing very well. But as far as growing, we want nothing to do with it.
So it sounds right, and you know, keep the right people doing the right things is really important to making sure you have high quality product. So it sounds like you did a nice job coming up with a farmer. Are you currently getting enough product for your machines, or
yes.
Are there farmers out there?
If I were doing strictly wholesale, then I would need a lot more. But we're going just strictly retail, and since the wholesale market was at one place and where it is today, for us to do wholesale is just not worth it. So we're creating our own brands. We're having our own following. This May 1st, we're going to be at Bringnell Vineyards in East Granby, and we're going to have our products there. And the word is starting to get out. We also bought a van, and we're going to be bringing our products to wherever it is that the market is calling for it.
Oh, that's great. As when you were developing this, putting together this, taking an old tobacco factory and turning it over to this type of lab, how much work had to get done in order to convert from one system to another? Because we talked to Jared about it's not just about the machines, it's also about the whole kind of envelope and the whole factory itself. So what are some of the things you actually did?
Well, we had to rip the place apart completely. And then what Jared said is so true. So we got in here and we actually put a transformer in the back. Now, I had to pay quite a bit of money for that transformer. And then I had to sign a document to give it back to Eversource. So that didn't fit over very well, but we had the capacity of running 10 of these machines in here. From the future, the market calls for it. So we went to the absolute max to make sure that we were going to need for nothing. But when it came to fixing this place up and getting all the rules and all the regs and everything else, if I would have known what I know today, I would have saved $300,000. I wouldn't have bought any distillation machines. I wouldn't have bought any pope machines. I wouldn't have bought a C1D1 lab because, like I said, we found the unique way of circumventing all that and taking out the fats and the waxes. But doesn't mean that I made a bad investment because there are some other products that we're going to be getting into, like CBN, and then some CBG that we're working into transdermal. we're not just doing creams, we're going to do actually what they call transdermals that get in. And as we are getting into our, what is it called? We're getting into a whole bunch more issues, and we are trying to create our own brand, and the own brand basically is purity. And that's why we have taken so long, and I'm glad I don't have any investor, because they would have been knocking on my door a very long time ago. So I'm happy to say that we are unique at what we are doing. And yes, the CO2 machine is critical to that, because you can run it at certain temperatures. You can run it faster, slower, and you can create whatever product you want without destroying any of those terpenes. Again, it is the taste that people are coming back to us.
So in terms of your space, how big is your overall space that you're using? So if I wanted to go start and do this, how much space would I actually need?
Well, you don't need as much as I have. I have 37,000 square feet, not because I wanted it, because I just inherited it when I bought it for the whole building. But if you guys don't mind, I'll take you real quick. Can you guys see me? Did I just do something wrong here?
Nope, we can see you.
You can see me. Okay, so I'll have to turn it around, and I will show you what we have here. This is our machine that we have. And again, today we're not using it because we used it the other day. And this produces quite a bit of product. And we have the decarboxylation oven. And just like Jared said, we also have. Hey,
Rick, can you point the camera down a little bit? We're looking kind of at the tops of things. That's okay.
We also have here the grinders. Now we'll go over towards the lab, and we separate where we do the extraction and the biomass. And now here's where we get into the labs. We separate these. Now what you're looking at right now is the C1D1 lab, bomb-proof, and this is what is required to make sure you can do all the distillation and everything else, the winterization. So here it is, and this is the room that we use for storage right now, because like I said, we found that way.
Yeah, we're still looking at a little of the tops of things. Just keep the camera pointed down a little bit.
Then we were to come here, where you have your rotary evaporator to remove the excess ethanol, your poop machine for more distillation, which again, we don't use for anything. So here's the crew right now. We're bottling our 3,000 full spectrum oil right now. And we tend to think that we're one of the few companies that have a full spectrum 3,000 milligram bottles, which means for every dropper you get 100 milligrams. And here's some of the biomass that we have here. When we first were doing it, we didn't have any idea what we were doing it, how we were doing it. So this is here that we will eventually use in the future for something. And here's another piece of machinery that we have, which is the chiller that gets it down to that minus 80% of your, so you can winterize. So
you gotta point, Rick, if you could point the camera down a little bit again, we're getting a lot of top.
Here is, there you go.
There you go.
That is the distillation machine. And then we have here all the biomass that we have. So we have quite a bit of biomass here. And if you're doing retail, this biomass does get us quite a bit of crude, full spectrum. It gets us what we need. And now we're really getting into the edibles when it comes to the cookies, the dog cookies, and the gummies. So here's a few growers. We have Connecticut, we have North Carolina. And then we're going to go back into what we have here, back into our labs. And it's knowing how to run these machines and knowing how to do what you need to do prior to that. So what we think in our philosophy and everything that I've ever done in my life is, if we're different and we're good at what we do, the rest will follow. And that's what's happening now. So it's coming slowly, but we're really coming back to it now.
That's awesome. In terms of the machine that you picked, again, this is 101 sort of for people who are trying to think about, if I wanted to go in this business, what were the considerations you used when picking that particular machine?
All right. Well, the reason what I did is because I actually flew out to Canada and I saw their production. I saw the people that were behind them. Do they stand by their machines or not? And when I did all my investigation, I figured that this company, Vitalis, was to me the best company out there and the ones that had the best machine for the price. Now, it was very expensive, but we got it and we have it here. And there's just so much more that we can do with this machine. So much more than even I think we can do. And we have pushed this machine to a point that it is basically self-producing. And it really is, I think, we're thinking about patenting the product that we have or how we do it to completely circumvent the whole distillation system.
Well, that's interesting. Now, you're using full spectrum.
Yep.
If somebody wanted something that's more on the isolate side, they still would have to go through some sort of distillation, I would think.
Well, if you want it, you can get it stronger. If you break it down, you take it to isolate, put it back in, and then, yeah, you can make something stronger. But as far as taking it right from the plant to full spectrum, nobody beats us because we're right there at 3,000 and we're just below the 0.3. We're actually 0.281 of THC, which is legal.
That's fabulous. That's great. It sounds like it took some time, but you've done a great job in terms of honing your particular business for what you guys are trying to achieve at the end, which is more on the manufacturing retail. It's not that you necessarily started out that way, but that's kind of where the business is sort of taking you at this point.
And we've teamed up with the chocolatier guy, and we're having a whole problem of how to be able to make sure that we have 30 milligrams out of every piece of chocolate, and we're having a difficult time. So what we have come up with, there's a whole bunch of people that are buying our bottles to cook with. They just use a dropper. And every cookie or in every dog biscuit, whatever it is, they put a dropper where it is 60 milligrams, whether it's 30 milligrams or 100 milligrams. That's the best way of doing it. With chocolate, we're still having a little bit of a hard time, but we're eventually having our own brand of chocolate too, as long as we can get all the testing and make sure that we have uniform. So if we make 500 pieces of chocolate, the one to the left has 80 and the other one to the right has 10. Doesn't work for us. We have to make sure that they're all either 30 or 60 or whatever it is that we want. And we're still doing tests on that one for the last 3 months. And we just can't figure it out just yet, but we will get it. Because the important thing about our product, like I said, it's the taste. That you eat chocolates or you eat a cookie or you eat a gummy, you don't taste anything. And that's what we have. You taste absolutely nothing of the CBD when we have our products.
Oh, that's great. So at this point, we're actually kind of early in terms of what we're actually doing. One of the questions that came up a little earlier on was about tolling and process tolling. I don't know if you guys do any tolling at this particular point in time. It sounds like maybe you're just doing your own thing.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't do any tolling because we have our own biomass. We do what we need to do, and we buy it. It's ours. We do what we need to do with it. We're doing white labeling for a company out here, but we actually bought his biomass, and we're just doing the white labeling for him. So that way there is no problem. Here's what the going rate is. Here's your money. And now he paid us some money for the labels. So we got the labels, and he wanted the 2,400 milligram bottles. And as soon as that test comes in, which could be any day, he's going to be taking anywhere from 400 to 500 bottles out of here. And then he's going to be reselling them.
So is that like a split contract that you have with them?
No, it's not a split contract because what I have done to him is we're selling to him wholesale, but we bought his product. So in other words, I'm not going to take your product and I take half of it. I don't do that. I buy your product, and here it is that now you buy my product. Okay.
So I know a lot of people, part of the thing that people really want to drive towards is like a continuous process. So you sounds like you're still kind of in the batch processing phase of things.
Well, if we were just doing wholesale, this machine would be running 24 hours a day. But we're not doing wholesale because it's just the price isn't there. It is not worth it for us to do wholesale, especially if we're removing the fats and the waxes prior. It really takes a long time to do so, to eliminate all that synthetic into our final products. So if somebody wants to pay our product, our crude, it doesn't combine with or match with what the industry is paying for. Not that we haven't sold a couple liters of it, we have, but they pay our price for it, and they're coming back. So what we're hoping is that they keep coming back, and that way we can keep producing the best quality oil. Now, like I said, the MCT oil that we have is completely organic and is a C8, the best of the best. And I think that a lot of our taste has to do not only with the way we extract, but also the fact that we're using C8, the most expensive MCT oil on the market.
Interesting. I noticed that when you were kind of going through your talk, you had some growers that were, in North Carolina, and then I guess the other grower you said was out of Vermont, I guess it was.
No, it's South Windsor and Simsbury,
In
Halls
Simsbury.
Farm
Okay.
and Wells Flower Farm.
All right. So you are getting product out of Connecticut. That's good to hear. I mean, I know there are a lot of small farms in Connecticut looking for people to potentially either do toll processing or sell or their biomass to.
Yeah, they've all called me.
I'm sure they have. When they call you, okay, what are the things that you are looking for in terms of their biomass? What makes a good biomass?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure the very first thing we check for is aflatoxins. We want to make sure that anything that we have in our machines and anything we put out there to the public has 0 aflatoxins, which are very bad for your health. So if we don't even test anything first, if we like what their numbers say, we test it. If it has no aflatoxins, then we check for potency, heavy metals, and everything else. And then we make a deal with them to buy their product. I pay them, and it's our product, and we do what we want with it. Some products, depending on the potency, we can make the 3,000 milligram bottles, and some we cannot. So you have to have a specific crude to make that full spectrum, and to the 3,000s. You cannot make it with all of them.
One of the questions just came across. What is your detection level for aflatoxin?
Well, none. We want absolutely nothing to do with that. Now, our machine can take a lot of the mold out. So mold doesn't really concern me that much, because between the decarboxylation and our machine, we can remove a lot of that. But the aflatoxins, we actually put our foot down on that one. Because you can't take that out. So if you're going to give that to a consumer, then we want no part of it. So the first thing we check for is those aflatoxins.
Okay. Another question that came out: if you were selling, I mean, can people actually buy your oils, obviously directly from you for wholesale?
Yes.
How do they go about doing that?
Well, they have to call up on the webpage and find out what they want. Once we take out that crude from the machine, now it's an illegal product because it's above the 0.3. So what we do with the other people that we have sold them about 10 liters, and those 10 liters, then we mix it to whatever they want. So we mix it with our C8 MCT oil, and we give it to them in a bigger batch, and now it's below the 0.3. They can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah, that sounds like one of those interesting regulations we always talked about sort of towards the beginning of this was during processing, you actually have material that is not capable for being sold because in that middle process, it has a higher concentration of THC, even though going out the door, it's legal. I know we had initially talked to some of the governments about how do we change that. If I remember correctly, at the beginning there was you had growers and manufacturers as 2 classes, but they never actually had processors. And towards the end, they realized processing sort of had to be its own class.
Well, what I would like to see in legislation say, if we're sending our crude or our very good oils across the country or across the street, that if it's going from one manufacturer to another manufacturer, even though it's going on government roads, it should be legal. And right now, it's an issue, a gray area that I'm not going to test.
Yeah.
So,
it sounds like what ends up happening is you have to take a material that might be in a liter form, dilute it down to maybe, so many gallons and then ship it. And which just increases the cost associated with shipping the material.
Well, right. Well, the people that we dealt with here, they come pick it up. So I am not going to risk I'll sell it to you. You take it out of here. It's your issue. But to play it safe, let's dilute. What are you using? Oh, you're going to make it for chocolates. You're going to make it for gummies. Well, let's make it already with the MCT. Let's mix it. Let's put it below the 0.3. And now there is no problem getting out of here in case something were to happen. And then that way we're all compliant with everything until the law becomes more clear that from one processor to another processor that could be legal. Because the more you purify the oils, whether it's out of the machine or you go through distillation, the stronger it gets in the THC.
Okay. A question just came across about your testing. Do you do a lot of testing in-house or do you send everything out?
We send for right now everything out. We do some testing here, but when it comes to the aflatoxins, we send it to Yukon because they're the best at that. And then the rest of the stuff, whether it be the heavy metal, the potency, we take we take them to Pro Verde, is in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you very much for mentioning Yukon. They are one of our sponsors here, so I'm sure they're happy about that.
That's where we take them. We have all the growers tell them to go to Yukon.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you guys do? Another question just came across. Well, this is interesting. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. They say FDA considers CBD a drug. They say it's not allowed in food products regardless of THC concentration.
Well, if that's what the case is, then there's a lot of people violating the law because they're in brownies or in cookies or everywhere else. So like, for example, I wanted to send my bottles overseas because through my highlight career, everybody out there knows that I want to do that. So I tried for about 2 months to see what I have to do to send our products over there. Instead of 0.3, it had to be below 0.2. Fine, I can still get my products there. I couldn't find anybody to give me direct answers. So I put one bottle in a shoebox and I said CBD oil, dietary supplements. I sent it overseas. It came back. Now we know what we need to do to ship it overseas. So it's kind of like, it's a gray area. It's a new law. If that question is that I have to answer that about the FDA considers CBD a drug, then a lot of people are violating the law.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's also state run when you come to some of those things.
Yeah, I don't know. I know.
Yeah, it's interesting. The comment came back. It sounds like the FDA and USDA have not gotten on the same page, and I definitely think that is the case as well. They're still trying to figure a lot of this stuff out. I think the CBD though has really, maybe you can answer this. I mean, CBD seems to be taking a backseat to everything related to THC. They see all the regulation coming out now, and everybody's talking about THC as opposed to CBD.
Exactly. So the issue is, if the FDA considers it to be a drug, then what about all these tinctures are out there? Because that's done orally.
Right.
So it's the same thing, that whether it's legal or it's not legal, if it were illegal, then I've made a big investment over nothing.
So which group do you guys actually, who regulates you as an entity?
Department of Consumer Protection regulates us as manufacturers. It's Department of Agriculture that represents or regulates the growers, but we're a part of the Consumer Protection.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. Okay. Let's see, I'm just checking our time. We got about 10 minutes before we can open this to everybody else. Is there anything that you would like to see change in this industry going forward?
Well, what is happening now, that more people are taking it, they're starting to realize, let me ask questions. How is it made? And I can show you an example right here. If you guys can see, can you guys see the bottles that were here on the table?
Drop it down a little bit. There you go. Now we can see.
Okay. Can you see?
Yep.
This is our 900. This is our 1800, 2400, and 3000. If you look really close.
Drop down a little bit, Rick. Drop down. No, bring your hand up a little bit. Up more. A little more. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Up, 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 up. There you go.
If you see real close, you'll see the crystals in there. That's how pure it is. And this is the competition.
A little higher. Yeah. Wow. Big difference.
That's the competition. So since the market has been not really regulated up until really now, but the most regulation is our own people. The consumer is going to start to ask these questions. Well, how is it made? So with us, we got all that with no distillation. Our numbers and our potency are through the roof because of what we learn how to do here. So once the public becomes educated on how we do it, we're not going to give away our secret sauce, but we're hoping that they're all going to come to us, because once you've tried the rest, you come to the best. You're not going back. And that's what we have achieved here in this little company here in Suffield, Connecticut. But it takes a lot longer to do.
Do you see any other obstacles ahead of you at this particular point in time?
Well, the biggest obstacles are contending with what the price is for one product versus what we sell for another product. Because I had a phone call from Alibaba. They wanted me to go into there. So I looked on their webpage and said, you get a 5,000 milligram bottle of hemp oil for $8.49. Now you just ruined the market. How am I going to go out there to sell my my 3,000 milligram bottle for $160 when the taste is through the roof and we do everything and I have to compete against somebody that's selling it for less than $10? So those are the biggest challenges. But the proof is when people take our product, they ingest it, it tastes good, it makes them feel better. And at the same time, then that's when they come back and the word of mouth gets out. So this is why we're thinking that we're going to start locally and then go globally. And that's why here in the Northeast, we want to be the premier and then eventually spread out and have to, because we have enough room for expansion here. But we're hoping that when the public becomes educated how it is done, nobody's going to want anything synthetics into. Yes, you take them back out, but they were in there in the first place. The difference between CO2 and ethanol, when we finish with our biomass, I give it to the local farmers and they throw it in bedding for the cows. When you take it out of a ethanol, that's biohazardous waste. So there's a big difference the way it is done, especially the way we do it, because we found the best way of trying to do it and extracting all those fats and waxes, or the vast majority of them, and giving that purity to the consumer, and that it all begins with the taste.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of big things in there that I think is really important, especially education. I think more and more people need to be educated about what's going on. I have a feel, from what I've seen in the market in terms of CBD, a couple of years ago, CBD was getting a lot of market attention. There were lots of companies that were out there putting it on shelves. There were a lot of big companies, your CVS's. There's a lot of talk about breweries and a lot of larger manufacturers of consumer products that were looking to put CBD into their products because of the wellness associated with it. Once the pandemic hit, it sounded like a lot of that went away. A lot of that marketing went away, a lot of people pushing it. So the entire market as a whole for CBD seemed to have contracted because there wasn't that marketing pressure from all these larger companies and larger groups encouraging more usage and educating people on what was going on. Whereas today, it seems like it's starting to come back a little bit. In fact, I just saw somebody actually who was going for a patent. I think it was a cosmetic company going for a patent on their CBD in their cosmetics line. Okay, yeah. So you're starting to hear more and more about it. So I think it's going to start to pick up again. I think also just in general, when you have a pandemic, not that we've had so many, thank God, but the uncertainty associated with what's going on, CBD oils was new, and a lot of people were trying it, and nobody knew exactly what the effect was. I think that trying kind of went away when people were much more concerned about, I need to go out and buy food. I can't buy CBD oil. I'm worried about my future and my job and stuff like that. But now that the pandemic's kind of winding down, jobs are starting to pick up again, I think you're going to see an upswing in the market. So even though you might have had to suffer for this past year, it might have been a little difficult, you did a lot of learning, I think the education in the consumer place is going to increase. And I think you got a bright prospect in the future for what you guys are accomplishing. Have you talked to any large consumer people that might be interested in your product, or is it still mostly on the local side?
Well, they have, but then they tell me, oh, look at the price that they're getting for it at Kush.com. And I tell them I'm going to go to Kush.com to get it, because I'm in the business to create a great product that's going to taste and make people feel better, and at the same time make money. It's okay to make money. And what they're proposing is going to cost me money to make, because I'm not going to be able to keep up with these people that are so in debt up to their ears. They're selling our crude oil for $75 a kilo. So for me, that's a waste of money. I don't do ethanol. We don't do it quick. We take our time, because ours is the final product. And like I said, some people do come here and buy it to find out for all their cooking and what they want to make, whether it be gummies or the oatmeal and cookies and even doggy biscuits. That's why they're coming here, because of the taste. And once we get into the transdermal, which we're hoping to have that pretty soon. That's going to go not just a cream, it's going to be a transdermal that goes through the skin into the muscle, right into the bloodstream. It's going to make it feel better. And that we're going to have a stronger one with CPG.
Interesting. How do you feel THC plays into this and into your particular business model?
Well, you know, I'm 59 years old. I've never smoked a joint, but my chemist gave me a piece of chocolate with THC, and I don't like the way it made me feel. But I guess it makes a lot of people feel good. And I like the way CBD makes me feel, which is just calm, relaxing. And one thing that it does for me, besides making me sleep good and no anxiety, I only get up once in the night to go relieve myself instead of 3. So I have this enormous amount of energy, not because the oils give me energy, because I get a great night's sleep. And I get up in the morning and say, yeah, this is good. So at 59 years old, there's nobody that can beat me with an axe here in the United States yet, cutting one big log. And you've seen it. So with that, I give high praise to it. Now, I had tried some other CBDs, and they had to flavor them because it tasted so horrendous. So with me, if you don't like the taste of slightly roasted hemp, then then I'm out of luck, because that's what people come back for because of the taste. And when you put them into other products, you don't taste anything. So they just take our bottles. Like right now, I have right here 6 bottles. Some lady wants to make some cookies. She's coming here to pick up 6 bottles because she's going to put 30 milligrams in each batch that she's making, and she can do them. She's going to make 200 cookies.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, it's just about noon, which is great. And that's sort of, we wanted to open it up to a lot of questions to others. I want to open it to the other people that are actually on the panelists. I don't know if other people have any questions of either Rick or Jared. We're more than happy to take those questions. If you think of anything, you can either put it into the chat room, or we can actually, you can just turn off your mute button and go from there. We have someone who raised their hand, but I'm not sure how to unmute somebody to raise their hand. Hang on. It looked like Shannon raised her hand, maybe. Oh, okay. There it is. Hang on a second. Shannon Young raised her hand. Let's see if I can do this. Shannon, are you there? You have a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Hi there.
There you go.
I had a question regarding the typically the staff that you're looking to hire, run an operation like that. Are you looking for people that are basically with a background in chemistry? Are there some strong heads in the group, and then there's the worker bees that are just following some general instructions? A lot of what Jared showed seemed to be pretty far out there, and I'm just wondering what the scale up time to learn how to run that equipment properly, and something just along those lines.
All right, Jared can answer that first, and then Rick, why don't you have to kind of give a realistic kind of what you actually, the people you have there. Go ahead, Jared.
Sure. I do actually own a CBD manufacturing facility out on the West Coast currently, so I've been through a lot of these trials and tribulations. You don't need a bunch of PhDs to run the equipment, but typically you do need a lead person or a supervisor to kind of look over everybody. And it's best if you have at least one person with experience in each of these extraction, refinement, and value-added manufacturing modalities. The way we run it on the West Coast is we have a shift supervisor who's familiar with all the processes, and then we have employees that are assigned to individual departments, either for extraction or refining or winterization or end product formulation. So that's the way we come about that. Typically for a new startup, I tell people it's 3 to 6 months to get people reasonably trained and to actually produce saleable good product at a reasonable volume. It's not that you're not producing in the first few months, you're just not producing at a solid volume.
Thanks, Jared. Rick, any comments?
Yeah, well, I can comment on trial and error. I hired a chemist beforehand, before the one that I have now. And it was kind of a disaster because he was into ethanol. I said, we're into CO2, and he shouldn't have come here because it just wasn't going to work out. So then we hired another chemist, and what a breath of fresh air. We actually let him do his job. We say, here's our vision. We want to make sure we have the cleanest oils. We want to be different than the other 3,000 companies out there. Now, this guy worked for one of the biggest companies out there. And so when we got him, we were very happy. And all these months we've been testing. And now because we got him, make sure you hire the right people for the right machinery that you have, especially if these people are going to be guiding you what machines to buy in the future. So I did buy all this machinery here that I don't think it went to waste, but it was some money that I could have saved just to do certain things. But yes, since we are going to be getting into CBN and those things, maybe even Delta 8, if it's legal or not, whatever it is, then we're going to be using those machines. But you have to find the right people to suit whatever you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody like to do a lot of volume, then yeah, there's a lot of people out there. But if you're looking for what we're looking for, to be specific and to highlight the taste and the purity, then hire the right people.
Sounds like some pretty great advice. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Jared. I appreciate that. Is there anybody else out there that might have a question? Give you a second. All right, it doesn't seem that way. So what I'll do is I'll kind of wrap up here. I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Thank you for our planning partners. And we'd also like to invite you to check out www.ctrcd.org/hemp to register for the rest of the upcoming webinars. This webinar has been recorded and also be available for viewing shortly at ctrcd.org/hemp and on YouTube. Remember, when you receive a brief survey today about hemp webinar, please take it. If feedback's important to us. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing all of you at the next presentation. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, John.